Well, welcome tonight to the next session of the class on Ecclesiastes, Searching for the Meaning of Life. We did last time a little introduction to the book of Ecclesiastes, the Ecclesiastes being part of the wisdom literature of the Old Testament, and what that means and how to approach the book, the major premise that the book sets out forth right in the beginning from the assumed author of Solomon, that everything is pointless. And then the major question he seeks to answer is, what can a person gain in life? What is there to gain? So we're going to continue on here. We're going to begin in chapter 2 in this session. So if you have your Bibles, go ahead and turn to Ecclesiastes chapter 2. And we're going to be getting into the text here. Ecclesiastes chapter 2, verse 1 says, I said to myself, come now, I will test you with pleasure to find out what is good. But behold, that also was pointless. I said of laughter, how stupid, and of pleasure, what does it accomplish? Here in the beginning of this section here, the phrase, I said to myself, it can be rendered as I dialogued with myself. It's like Solomon's having this own internal conversation with himself here. And so he sets out this premise here that he's going to now go and do an experiment. He wants to experiment as he's seeking to answer the question of what can a person gain in life that makes it meaningful. He says that I will test you with pleasure. So that's going to be his main focus here. He's going to test pleasure as a pursuit in life for meaning. The word pleasure here can also mean joy or delight. There's nothing like inherently sexual or negative about pleasure. It's just things that are enjoyable. And Solomon does describe pleasure later on in terms of sensuality that include sexuality, but it's not exclusively that. Here, at the beginning of this section, once again, Solomon front-loads the section with his discovery, his conclusion. He says, behold, this is what he discovered, that pleasure was also pointless. And then he gives kind of like this little mock of pleasures that I said of laughter or, of being jolly. How stupid. And of pleasure or of enjoying things, he says, what does that accomplish? So that's what he ends up discovering. He puts that up front. And then he goes to proceed how he arrived at that conclusion again. Now, this is sort of a hedonistic approach that Solomon is taking. He's looking at what can he enjoy in life, and hedonism is sort of like the seeking of pleasure in life. He's going to run through the whole gamut of all kinds of things that people can enjoy in life, and he does not stop short of any avenue. So let's see what he does first to test pleasure. Verse 3 says, I searched with my heart how to entice my flesh with wine. My heart still guiding me with wisdom. He says, I searched with my heart. As we talked about last time, the Hebrew idea of heart is about not an organ in your chest or anything like that. It's just a description of your whole being. It's all your thoughts, your attitudes, and your emotions. So he's saying, I searched with all that I am, my whole being. I threw myself into this. And what did he do? He looked to entice his flesh with wine. So he begins here in his pursuit of pleasure with exploring and experimenting with wine or indulging in drink. The word here, entice my flesh, can also mean to sustain. It kind of just means to nourish, meaning he kind of partook of wine and of drinking as a way to find fulfillment in life. Now, this isn't drinking in like excess or drunkenness. He's talking about enjoying wine, or wine as part of enjoyment in life. Now, he says, though, in this little parenthesis here, my heart's still guiding me with wisdom. Solomon's claiming that his heart is still being guided by wisdom in this pursuit of wine and the intoxicating effects as a program for experiencing pleasure in life. But hold on a moment. How is that really wise? How is wisdom guiding him to do this? Because that's what he's saying. His heart is guiding him with wisdom. This doesn't sound like a very wise thing to do or even a good idea. In fact, wisdom, as described in the book of Proverbs, speaks directly contrary to this sort of idea of giving yourself to pleasure with drinking. In Proverbs chapter 23, in verse 19, it says, "You'd better listen, my son, and be wise, and direct your heart on the upright road. Do not be among those addicted to wine, or with gluttonous meat eaters, for the addict and the glutton will become impoverished, and drowsiness wears rags." And then a little bit below in chapter 23 and verse 29, it says, "Who has woe? Who has sorrow? Who has contentions? Who has a complaint? Who has wounds without cause? Who has bleary eyes? It is those who linger over wine, those who come in to taste mixed wine. Do not look at the wine when it sparkles with red, when it gleams in the cup, when it goes down smoothly. In the end, it bites like a serpent, and its poison like a viper. Your eyes will see strange things, and your heart will speak perverse things. And you will become like one who lies down in the middle of the sea, or like one who lies down on the top of a ship's mast. They struck me, but I did not feel pain, you might say. They hit me, but I did not know it. When will I awaken? I will seek it yet again." So we have to ask, what sort of wisdom is Solomon espousing here that is leading him to indulge in wine as an experiment for the meaning of life with pleasure? Well, the idea is this is not the godly wisdom of which Proverbs is speaking about that cautions against excess drinking of wine. But this is wisdom about the rational faculties of your mind. What Solomon is saying is that he's maintaining his investigation with a proper sense about him, meaning he's not getting lost in the wine. So we can rule out he's not proposing just this rampant drunkenness and intoxication. He's not talking about alcoholism or other debauchery. He wants to test enjoyment with wine within certain boundaries without losing himself and thereby preventing himself from actually being able to answer the question he's setting out to answer. His investigation of whether drinking was a solution, consuming wine as a means of enjoying life, was that a solution to the emptiness of life and the question of meaning? And so Solomon is seeking to determine this through rational indulgence of wine that he thinks might result in satisfaction and meaning in life. So we could ask, well, why is wine even a part of pleasure seeking for Solomon? Why not something like cheesecake or chocolate or ice cream? I mean, of course, these things didn't exist back then, so Solomon had no access to them. But is there something particular about why he chose wine? Well, actually, in recent modern scientific studies, they found that wine actually changes your neurochemistry. After ingesting a small portion of alcohol, the brain increases its release of certain feel-good hormones and neurotransmitters like dopamine and other endorphins, which will block pain and also produce a sensation of general happiness and well-being. Alcohol also alters the neural activity of certain parts of your brain, like the prefrontal cortex and the temporal lobes. These are responsible for more analytical and rational thinking, so that the person becomes a little less self-conscious, they become less focused on stressful things, less tense overall, thereby leading to a more relaxed and content state of mind with feelings of joy, pleasure, and even euphoria. So that, I think, can explain how come this is Solomon's choice of drink in order to try to test pleasure in his life. Now he says he does this also with a direction toward how to embrace folly, he says. Well, Solomon's looking at this whole thing in the sense of this is not his number one thinking of the solution, but he says people look at drinking in a foolish way, so I'm just going to entertain the idea, and perhaps maybe this does have the answer I seek. But he considers it to be foolishness or folly. But he does this with the aim that he can see what is good for the sons of men that they should do under heaven in the number of the days of their lives. He's looking for what is good in this pursuit, not how to veer off into wickedness or other wrongful behaviors. And he's doing it in a sense of trying to discover, is this something for people that can answer a question for them in what is life about? Is life about enjoying what is good in pleasure? And there's a limited number of days in a person's life. He just has this view of brevity in mind. The shortness of life leads him to want to discover this answer. But it's not just wine that he's testing. As we move on to verse 4, he goes on to then look at other pleasures of life. He says, I made great works for myself. I built myself houses. I planted vineyards for myself. I made gardens and parks for myself. I planted in them trees of all kinds of fruit. He made these beautiful orchards, he's saying. I made pools of water for myself, from which to water groves of flourishing trees. So he launches on here to explain that he undertook these massive building projects, all kinds of aesthetic beauty of wanting to create orchards and vineyards and gardens and palaces and all these great things that people can enjoy in life, things that you can build and construct. This sounds an awful lot like some of what is described about Solomon in the book of 1 Kings. Now, last time we talked about Solomon being a likely candidate for the authorship of Ecclesiastes, and there are some really good reasons for that, but then there's also some questions about the authorship as well, since the author is never personally identified. Now, one of the things for Solomon is this description of these building projects and everything correlates with what is described of him in 1 Kings chapter 4. Which I'll read for you. It says, Judah and Israel were as many as the sand that is by the sea in abundance, eating and drinking and rejoicing. And Solomon ruled over all the kingdoms from the river to the land of the Philistines and to the border of Egypt. They brought tribute and served Solomon all the days of his lives. Solomon's provision for one day was 30 cores of fine flour and 60 cores of flour, 10 fattened cattle, 20 cattle out of the pastures, and 100 sheep. Besides harts and gazelles and roebucks and fattened fowl. He also had dominion over everything on this side of the river, from the Tiphah to Gaza, all over the kings on this side of the river. He had peace on all sides around. Judah and Israel lived in safety, every man under his vine and under his fig tree, from Dan to Beersheba, all the days of Solomon. Solomon had 40,000 stalls of horses for his chariots and 12,000 horsemen. Those officers provided for King Solomon and for all who came to King Solomon's table, each man in his month. They let nothing be lacking. And they also brought barley and hay for the horses and the swift steeds to the place where it was required, and each man according to his turn. So to be able to undertake all these building projects, you'd have to have a lot of labor support. You have to have a lot of manpower, a lot of provisions and materials. And it sounds like Solomon had it all. He would be able to undertake projects like this. And it's not just these building projects. It goes on to describe, Solomon describes what he undertook as he bought male and female slaves and had slaves who were born in my house. I also had great possessions and herds of flocks. We just read that he had 40,000 stalls of horses and 12,000 horsemen. And these were more than all who had been before me in Jerusalem. I also gathered silver and gold for myself and the treasure of kings and of the provinces. I acquired male and female singers for myself and the delights of the sons of men, many beautiful concubines. This is what it says about King Solomon in 1 Kings chapter 10. Now, the weight of gold that came to Solomon in a single year was 666 talents of gold, in addition to what came from the traders and from the merchants and from the traveling merchants, merchandise and the traveling merchants, and what came from all the kings of Arabia, from the governors of the country. And King Solomon made 200 large shields of beaten gold. 600 shekels of gold went into each large shield. He made 300 shields of beaten gold. 3 minas of gold went into each shield. And the king put them in the house of the forest of Lebanon. And it goes on to describe, he put gold on his throne. He had armrests of gold. He had statues. He had drinking vessels of gold. And he never used silver. He had so much gold, he didn't even touch silver. Silver was worthless, basically, it says, in the time of King Solomon. So he had all this money, all these animals, he had all these people, and he had a lot of women. So he's going to town. He's testing every aspect of pleasure that he could discover to see once, does this fulfill and does it give meaning to life? And while he's doing this, he says here, I became great and surpassed all those who had been before me in Jerusalem. So he sees himself as kind of excelling beyond anybody before him. And he says, still my wisdom also remained with me. So even throughout all this, he says he has his mind intact. He's pursuing the answer to this quest. And this is years and years of effort. He's saying, though, that he's keeping wisdom with him to try to discover the answer to the question, what does a person gain in all this? This is similar to the claim in verse 3 about when Solomon said that his heart was guiding him with wisdom as he partook of wine. And again, he's trying to reassure the reader here that he has not lost himself. He's not lost track of his goal in his quest. Now, verse 10 says, and whatever my eyes desired, I did not keep from them. I did not withhold my heart from any pleasure. For my heart was pleased because of all my labor, and this was my portion for all my labor. He pursued every end in sight, whatever his eyes desired. Now this is referring to kind of all of the different building projects he did, the vineyards, the gardens, and everything in the palaces, and all the animals he had, and all the female and male slaves and everything. Everything he wanted. He said, I tried it. I did not withhold my heart from any pleasure, for my heart was pleased because of my labor. So we know this is more than just some emotional or physical pleasure. This also deals with all of the things that he created and made as well. All the beautiful scenery and landscaping and everything that was pleasing to the eye. And his heart was pleased because of all of his labor. And this was my portion for all my labor. He's saying that he enjoyed everything he got to do. And this was something that was his reward. He was able to enjoy all this labor. And he was very happy with it. The satisfaction in his heart was his portion or what he got from it. So he's saying that there was something good that I was able to enjoy from it, and my heart received that. But that wasn't good enough. That didn't answer the ultimate question he was looking to figure out. And so he then says, but when I turned to consider all the works that my hands had worked and the labor that I had labored to do, behold, all was pointless. So it seems like he's like, I really enjoyed getting to do all this stuff, but it actually didn't mean anything. Sort of a letdown. He spent years on this pursuit and said his heart was pleased with all of his work. But at the end of the day, when he looks back on everything he's done, when he considers the work in light of the question he's asking, what does a person gain, truly, actually, ultimately gain from it? How does it change life in an ultimate sense? He says, behold, all was pointless and hurting the wind. And there was no profit under the sun. This word profit here, this is the idea of gain. He didn't profit, he didn't gain anything by it all. So, that didn't work, he says. So then, he tries something else. I turned myself next to consider wisdom, madness, and foolishness. For what can the man do who will come after the king? Only that which has already been done. I want to go back and say one more thing, though, about his conclusion here. Sometimes in our lives we hear people talk about, maybe you've heard the phrase that money can't buy happiness. That's sort of what Solomon was trying to do. Everything he did, this is all monetary expenses usually with physical enjoyment and pleasure. But sometimes we attach meaning to things. As though if we don't have them, then life is somehow like incomplete, or it's not full. We're missing out on something. The funny thing is that people usually will not say that they believe meaning is found in the things that they own or that they could own. But practically speaking, many people act that way. They act like their belongings are really meaningful in their life, that somehow their life would not be complete if they did not have them or couldn't have them. And therefore, that suggests that money and belongings play a significant role in how a lot of people view the meaning of life. But money comes and goes, doesn't it? I was at a concert recently where the performers, these two brothers, were talking about their family history. They gave a little biography. And they talked about how when they were growing up with their family in Australia, that their dad lost everything. 100%, everything. They had nothing except the shirts on their backs and the shoes on their feet. And he decided to move them to Nashville, Tennessee, to try to have a new start. And from there, through various opportunities, they were able to establish themselves and be able to then have the kids be involved in musical productions, and then they end up getting the music industry. But they went from having to not having, and then back to having. I mean, if life is attached to the meaning, if the meaning of life is attached to money and these things, what does that do to your personal sense of identity if what you have you no longer have? It seems like meaning would evaporate then. Could you imagine losing everything? It's possible. The testimony of these two brothers proves it's in reality somewhere, and their story's not the only story. There are people who've lost everything before. It's possible that one day everything we have could be gone. Burned, stolen, wrecked, or bankrupt. We could end up with nothing. Would our lives feel empty if we lost everything? Now, sure, we would have a sense of loss because we wouldn't have those things anymore. But would we feel empty because we lost it all? If we have nothing to show for our years of labor and hard work, that could be a temptation for us to think that we somehow failed at life. If life is, and the meaning of life is about what we have, what we can get. So moving past that, Solomon turns to consider now wisdom, madness, and foolishness. This idea, madness and foolishness here, is not mental insanity or problems like that. It's just these are sort of like senseless musings. You could think madness and foolishness as being just foolishness in general. It could be a combination of words the Hebrew scholars think. Could be like foolish madness, things like that. And he asks, what can the man or the person do here who will come after the king? So what can he do next? Except that's what's already been done. We saw previously in the last episode, the last session, that the author has this cyclical view of history. What has been done will be done. What has been done then will be done. It just is going to, life and history just has this cycle to it. It just goes over and over. And so that's what he sees here is whoever comes next, what else are they going to do that I haven't already done? They're going to do the same thing. There's nothing new that they're going to do. They're only going to do what's already been done. Now he admits in verse 3 here that he sees that wisdom is superior to folly. So he admits, he sees there is an advantage to wisdom. It's better. It's better than foolishness. And he likens it here in a simile to that light is superior to darkness, that somebody who is wise has light. Somebody who's foolish has darkness. And then the wise person has eyes in his head so he can see the light. He knows where he's going. He can determine what is ahead. But unlike the wise person, the foolish person walks in darkness. They're like a blind person. They just kind of stumble around and grope along the wall. They don't know where they are and they don't know where they're going. And yet, he says, I perceived that one event happens to them all. So here he's setting up his next dilemma as he's thinking about, okay, well, if pleasure doesn't do it, what if it's living wisely? What if that's what actually helps somebody have meaning in life, is you're living wisely rather than foolishly? We know that wisdom's better, so how about that? But actually, the same thing happens to both of them, he says. There's one event. There's not two. So if you're wise and if you're foolish, you only get one event. And that event, he says, then I said to myself, he likes to talk to himself, have his little internal dialogues. As it happens to the fool, so it will happen even to me. So why then was I more wise? What he's talking about, as you will get to, is death. That everybody dies. The wise person dies, the fool dies. So he's saying, just like the fool who dies, well, that will happen to me someday. I will die too. So then why did I go through the effort of living wisely? Why use wisdom if both wisdom and folly end up coming together and meeting at the same point? Death. Then I said in my heart that this is also pointless. For of the wise man, even as of the fool, there's no lasting memory. So it's not just that they both die. He even goes on to say, and also eventually they're both forgotten about. Death claims them both, and so does forgetfulness. seeing that in the days to come all will have been forgotten. And how will the wise man die? Just like the fool. He sees that there's no difference, he thinks. Why be wise if you can just end up dying the same way a fool does? There's nothing to gain. There's no added advantage. There's nothing that pushes you up beyond where you were before. And so Solomon then says, I hated life. I hated life. Those are strong words. We get a glimpse here of Solomon's bitter attitude. This remark, I hated life, comes out after this long pursuit of pleasure and then thinking about wisdom and madness and foolishness. All his life, he's been seeking this grand quest to answer this question, only to prove to himself that everything he tried was pointless. There's a desperation here. How would you feel if you thought you were going to discover the great answer to life's question of meaning, and in the end, your conclusion is that, dang, it was all just a big waste of time? That doesn't like fill you with a sense of fulfillment. It didn't provide any. This pursuit here of pleasure, luxury, wealth, women, construction, and everything didn't provide the answer Solomon was looking for. And so he found it to be pointless. Nothing but hurting the wind. Pointless and hurting the wind. What a sad realization he had to come to. There are many young people like Solomon. They have grand aspirations of becoming famous, perhaps, or making lots of money, or doing incredible things so that people admire them. Maybe you've thought this way, or perhaps you still do. That there's something waiting for you at the end of the long road of your struggle. Some payoff that you think will justify all the effort and will give meaning to the sacrifices you've made along the way. Well, I hope there is a payoff for you. I hope that you do achieve your aspirations and the things that you're striving for. But I'm going to burst your bubble. I'm going to tell you that if you're looking for true meaning in what you're doing in your life, then you will be disappointed just like Solomon. Life's meaning is not found in the things we do, no matter how wonderful and exciting and grand they might be. All the incredible things we can accomplish under the sun, they will not fill us with a sense of fulfillment. At the end of our lives, we will become distressed and discouraged, like Solomon, when we finally realize that all of it is ultimately pointless. So let's not let pleasure, entertainment, fame, fortune, or anything else become what we seek to find meaning in life for. We're going to take a short break, and then we'll be back for the next session.